Welcome back, everybody, to the Michigan Trails Report. I'm your host, Tom Funk. Thanks for joining me once again. Today's podcast is going to cover an abandoned trail, if you will, almost forgotten, and someone who was thought to have maybe hiked it. And that would be the Vieux Desert Lance hiking trail and Father Rene Menard. Now, he may not be a name that you're familiar with. We are familiar with, in Michigan anyways, Jacques Marquette, probably Jean Nicolet, Pierre Radisson, and Champlain. Because these are names that have pretty much been etched into the collective memory of Michiganders and residents of the upper Midwest, Eastern Canada, and even Wisconsin. Rene Menard. Well, I think most Michiganders know more about Taylor Swift's most recent boyfriend than this French Jesuit priest that stumbled into the wilderness and mysteriously disappeared in 1661. But first, let's back up and realize that Menard, nor any other European, were the first to discover the area. The story of Rene Menard really revolves around Vieux Desert, a lake located on the border of today's Wisconsin and Michigan's Upper Peninsula. And this is a place of great historical and cultural significance. For thousands of years, Vieux Desert has been a vital part of the network of waterways and trails used by Native Americans, particularly the Ojibwa or Chippewa and the Menominee. Its strategic location made it a crucial link between the Mississippi River and the Great Lakes, facilitating trade, travel, and cultural exchange. So if you pull out a map and look and find Vieux Desert, you'll see the Chippewa River draining to the south and west. You'll see the nearby Ontonagon River watershed, and I believe you'll see some tributaries of the Menominee. So this lake you could connect to Lake Superior, Lake Michigan, and the Mississippi River. Our indigenous figured this out thousands of years ago before us Europeans stumbled upon the scene. So the Ojibwa, this is one of the largest Algonquin-speaking tribes, and they have a deep historical connection to the Vieux Desert area. The lake and its surrounding region provided them with abundant natural resources, fish, game, wild rice, you name it. And the name Vieux Desert is the French interpretation from the Ojibwa term they use to call the lake. And, I don't want to embarrass myself by trying to pronounce the Ojibwa, but it does mean Lake of the Old Clearing. The Menominee, whose name means wild rice people, also utilize the rich resources of Vieux Desert. Both tribes are semi-nomadic, moving seasonally to take advantage of fishing, hunting, and gathering opportunities. The lake and its environs were integral to their subsistence, culture, and spiritual practices. Vieux Desert was more than just a resource hub. It was a pivotal point in the extensive network, as I had mentioned, of trade routes. And these routes connected, Great Lakes and Mississippi River, also to Mackinac Island, and even further east to Montreal. That's why we find, various items of historical significance. They may have been thought to have been made in Canada, but we find them out in North Dakota because of these travel routes and trade network. The Ojibwa and Menominee are up in the northern reaches of North America, and they utilize birch bark canoes, expertly crafted to navigate the region's rivers and lakes. Vieux Desert was a crucial node in this network, again, serving as a connection point between these various travel routes. Vieux Desert also has thought to have a lot of spiritual power, and locations like Vieux Desert were central to various ceremonies and rituals. So the lake and surrounding forests were considered sacred places where spirits raised and could be communicated with through rituals and offerings. It brought together different bands of the Ojibwa Menominee, reinforcing social bonds, cultural traditions, and the like. So it wasn't only trade, but also these spiritual events. The arrival of European explorers and fur traders in the 17th and 18th centuries dramatically altered the dynamics of the region. French explorers like Pierre Radisson, Menard Groseilliers, followed by the missionaries such as Father Rene Menard, ventured into the Great Lakes region, often guided by indigenous because they knew the travel routes. The fur trade introduced new goods to the Native Americans and economic opportunities for the French, but also brought significant challenges. Brought disease, displacement, cultural disruption. The indigenous peoples adapted to these changes by engaging in the fur trade, which further integrated Lac Vieux Desert into a broader economic network connecting European settlements with the interior of North America. And by the 19th century, the U.S. government's policies of forced removal and land treaties significantly impacted the Ojibwa and Menominee tribes. The Treaty of 1842 and other treaties beyond that ceded large portions of the traditional lands, including the area around Lac Vieux Desert, to the U.S. government. So a lot of Ojibwa were relocated to reservations, although some bands, such as the Lac Vieux Band, the Lake Superior Chippewa, they managed to retain a portion of their ancestral lands. And despite these challenges, the Ojibwa and Menominee continued to maintain their cultural practices and connection to the land. The Lac Vieux Desert Band in particular has worked to preserve their heritage and advocate for their rights. And one of these things they have done is to maintain the Lac Vieux Desert Lance Hiking Trail, which is a major transportation route between Lake Superior and Lac Vieux, and was thought to be used on a regular basis and was finally, I don't want to say disbanded, but fell into little use as recent as the 1940s. So that's pretty neat to know. So if you go there today, there's educational institutions, there's interpretive trails, cultural programs, and the like. So they're trying to ensure that their legacy continues to be honored and remembered. So Lac Vieux Desert Hiking Trail, this is a historical route that weaves through the stunning landscapes of Michigan's Upper Peninsula, stretching from the shores of Lac Vieux Desert to the community of Lance. So, if you hiked it, it's not only a testament to the natural beauty, but also a silent witness to the historical journeys of explorers, missionaries, and indigenous peoples who have traveled this path for thousands of years. So, and again, one of the most notable historical figures associated with the trail is Father Rene Menard, a French Jesuit priest whose travels and eventual disappearance remain shrouded in history. So this, again, was a significant route for the people in the area. And what they would do is they would hike from Lance down to Lac Vieux and create new birch bark canoes to go further on, and vice versa. Some are thought to have carried their canoes on this about 45-mile-long trail, but birch bark canoes, the supplies are quite plentiful and they're pretty easy to make, so I guess it would just depend on how fast they would want to get to their destination. So Menard, well, he was not an explorer like Marquette. He was a saver of souls. So like Marquette, he died doing his life mission in the Great Lakes, but unlike Marquette, pretty much everything about his route, travel companions, method of travel, manner of death, it's not a mystery that it happened, but more how it happened. Circumstances surrounding everything about Menard, from when he was abandoned by his travel party, to how his artifacts ended up with a Sioux Indian years after his death. Well, this has been debated and discussed for nearly 400 years, and several amateur and professional historians have delved into solving the mystery of Rene Menard. So we're going to take a look at how his life has been interpreted, examining what little source materials we have, the words of others, the speculations of what may have happened, how he traveled, and how he died. So Rene Menard, he was born in Paris, France in 1605. He joined the Jesuits on the 7th of September of 1624 in Paris, and then he traveled to Canada in 1640, and in 1641 he had already learned the language of the Wyandot, or the Huron, and was soon in charge of many of the satellite missions around Ste. Marie among the Hurons, which is in Canada, And Menard worked with the Iroquois and was said to speak 6 Indian dialects. So he did this even though he was being continuously attacked by the Iroquois, and because he was affiliated with the Huron. So in 1660, Menard was sent west from Montreal with the fur traders Radisson and Groseilliers to what is now northern Wisconsin, aiming to establish a mission among the Ottawa. Menard was 55 years old at the time, and he did not expect to return. One of the few source materials is a letter he wrote the night before to a friend, and I quote, "In 3 or 4 months you may include me in the memento for the dead, in view of the kind of life led by these people of my age and of my delicate constitution. In spite of that, I have led such a powerful promptings and seen in this affair so little of the purely natural that I could not doubt if I failed to respond to this opportunity that I should experience an endless remorse," unquote. Groseilliers and Radisson, well, they were friends with Menard before this trip. So it is thought that Menard somehow talked his way into going with them because he was in poor health and poor shape. A lot of these explorers, they did not want extra people tagging along that couldn't contribute. He did know at least 6 languages, so that may have been why they let him go along. So Radisson and Groseilliers, it's important to note with Groseilliers, he is thought to be the first European to cross the lower peninsula. And Radisson is thought to have explored into the upper Midwest, possibly as far north to Hudson Bay. And he probably discovered the Mississippi River before Marquette did. Thing is, neither Groseilliers nor Radisson took notes, but Marquette did. So Marquette is the one that is credited with discovering them. Radisson, though, wrote a book later in life for King Charles of England from memory in broken English, as Radisson was French. And I've read this book. Guys, it is a hot mess full of fanciful stories, timeline issues, and a fabrication of 200 or 300. And as I mentioned, it's almost certain that Groseilliers and Radisson reached the upper waters of the Mississippi before Marquette and Joliet. This is because on the 19th of August, 1660, Groseilliers and Radisson had returned from being out for 2 years with enough furs to buy a small nation. So they were out for a long time. They were exploring and trying to document. There was no maps or anything at the time. So, they didn't write this stuff down, unfortunately. But they did demonstrate there's a lot of value to exploring in these north woods. Thing is, back in the day, one needed to have a permit to trade with the Native Americans, and this was because the French government agreed to setting up trading monopolies, and these monopolies controlled the trade with Native Americans through what is best described, I guess in today's term, as a permit. So you've heard the term voyager, which these are explorers that had the blessing of these monopolies, but they were considered, Radisson and Groseilliers were anyways, a coureur de bois, which were unpermitted traders. And when they had returned to Montreal after being gone for 2 years with all these furs, they were essentially confiscated, and they were left with little to anything, and hence the reason why they went back into the woods. The party didn't go easy on Father Menard. So what happened is they figured that the party kind of got spread out, and Menard got separated from the French traders, and he was forced to kind of continue on his own and carrying the heavy loads he had with them. It's thought to have thought that he was finally abandoned some point after the St. Mary's River's rapids. In Radisson's notes, he mentions that the party's canoe, Menard's party, was destroyed by a falling tree in mid-October. So historians believe that Menard's party at the time was and Radisson's party, everybody, was all spread out. And being at the end of the season, Radisson and Groseilliers kept moving on and left Menard behind. And what ended up happening is Menard wintered with some Ottawas at Keweenaw Bay near as what is now Lance, Michigan. He sheltered in a hut he made from tree branches, and at times he subsisted on fish begged from the Indians and boiled moss, better known as rock tripe. Despite these hardships and resistance from the Indians, he ended up baptizing and teaching the Christian faith over this winter. So it seems that, one of the controversies is how in the world can a tree smash a canoe? Well, they would pull these canoes up on shore and sleep underneath them. So the thought is there may have been a storm and a tree fell on it, and that's why he got stranded there somewhere on the Lake Superior shore. And it is thought that he was actually rescued by some Native Americans and brought to Lance. Once he got to Lance, he found that the supplies were meager. They were digging for bones, and they were eating off of scraps. They couldn't even find, enough cloth to dress wounds. They were pretty much living off of dried meat. The fishing wasn't very good at the time, so they were starting to rely on a starvation food, which is known as tripe de roche, or as I mentioned before, rock tripe. It's also called tripe of the rocks. This is a moss that what you do is you boil it and you throw in spiders and ants and other protein, and you eat it like a tapioca pudding, if I will. So that's a survival food. They were there and went over through the winter, and as you'll see, it was a pretty mild one. So, and I would like to point out again that source materials for this story, they are minuscule. We do have a couple letters written by Rene Menard to Superior, and what Radisson transcribed later. We have some oral history as well. A lot of these stories are speculative, however well thought out. So I'll share more here in a little bit. But a key source document is his letter he wrote at the beginning of the journey to the Upper Great Lakes, written in August of 1660, which is printed in the Jesuit Relations. And it goes as follows. My Reverend Father, this is probably the last word that I shall write to you, and I wish it to be the seal of our friendship until eternity. May your friendship, my good Father, be useful to me in the desirable fruits of your holy sacrifices. In 3 or 4 months, you may include me in the memento of the dead, in view of the kind of life led by these peoples, my age, and of my delicate constitution. In spite of that, I have felt such powerful promptings and have seen in this affair so little of the purely natural that I could not doubt, if I failed to respond to this opportunity, that I would experience an endless remorse. We have been somewhat taken aware at not being able to provide ourselves with clothing and other things, but he who feeds the little birds and clothes the lilies of the field will take care of his servants. And even if it should be our lot to die of want, it would be a great piece of good fortune for us. So this is before his trip, where he then had to overwinter in between 1660 and 1661. Our next piece of source material is a letter written dated June 2nd, 1661 by Father Rene Menard to his superior at Quebec. It is written from the Bay of St. Therese, which is known as today's Keweenaw Bay. And this is where Menard was laboring among the Ottawas, who he accompanied the preceding year to this location. And he says he had gained 6 converts in this time, whose pious fervor and pure lives console him in his life of privations and trials, as he says. Also in the letter, he mentions his poverty. He needs presents for the Indians. He needs clothing. He needs some medications, and he also needs some tobacco, which, by the way, tobacco was used as money in that region. These people are also so poor, I quote, and we likewise, that we cannot find a scrap of cloth wherever to make a compress or a piece of stuff as large as one's hand with which to mend our clothes, unquote. Menard does mention the unusual mildness of winter at Lake Superior. If it was probably a typical winter, it probably would have killed him. But he is uncertain in his letter how long he'll be staying at Keweenaw, and states that he must go to the spring rendezvous of the Algonquins, which was probably either at Vieux or at Chequamegon. The letter at this point he was writing was in March 1st, and it remained unfinished until he completed it on June 1st. So he gives a summary of his experiences during that interval. The supply of fish was deficient this winter, and I quote, those who wished to keep Lent suffered greatly. But after Easter, they apparently had an abundance of moose meat. So there was 9 Frenchmen in the area as well. And they were actually coming through and going to the rendezvous. So the spring, well, it was cold and stormy. They were still having frosts. And there were some fugitive Hurons with these Frenchmen, and they were also heading to seek refuge in the forests of central Wisconsin. So you have these Frenchmen and Native Americans passing through in the spring on the way to this rendezvous. So Menard sends some of the Frenchmen to an Indian chief who was to procure corn from him, but they don't return when he expected them, and now his provisions are almost gone. So things are getting pretty dire there. In his letter, he also says, and I quote, "One of my first visits at the spot where we were to winter was a hovel, the most miserable cabin of all, erected under a large decayed tree which served as a shelter on one side and upheld some branches of cedar and hemlock which kept off the wind on the other. I entered almost on all fours, and under that tree I found a treasure. It was a woman, abandoned by her husband and her daughter, who had left her 2 little children, and they were dying. One was about 2, the other about 3. I began to speak of the faith to this poor afflicted creature, and she heard me with pleasure, which she expressed in these words. 'My brother,' she said to me, 'I know well enough that my people do not approve thy discourses, but for my part I relish them very much, and what thou sayest is full of consolation.'" So at the same time, she drew out, according to Menard in his letter, a piece of dried fish, which she deprived herself to pay him for his visit. So he was very gracious that he was able to have this opportunity to assure himself of the salvation of these 2 innocents and the mother. Also in his letter, quote, "There has been no winter here to speak of. Our great bay of St. Therese, on whose shore we have wintered, has been frozen over only since the middle of February. I have said Holy Mass every day from All Saints' Day to March, without any fear of the elements would freeze or that I would need any fire at the altar. I brought with me only a pint of Spanish wine, which is very little considering the great distance for a person who has no other consolation in the world but that august sacrifice. Alas, I know not when that wine will fail me, and I know not whether anyone will ever bring me some. Vines are not to be seen here any more than any other comforts, which are fairly common down below. God has persevered my altar bread inside a small box, which was quite ruined by the water that entered it, and may last me till the autumn of the year 1662. I must push to the last post, the Bay of Esprit, 100 leagues from here. There the savages have their rendezvous in the early spring, and we must decide either to leave the country entirely or to settle permanently in some place where we may hope to grow wheat. I pray the Father of Light to direct the purpose of these poor people toward his own greater glory." So this was a summary of what happened between the 1st of March and the 1st of June. So the natives are living on moose meat, which came very opportunely. It just kept coming. So they didn't have any fish. So it was a great thing that they were able to have the moose meat. So again, these Frenchmen had passed through with some natives on their way west, and so in the spring, one of the Western Travel members was coming back east, and he had told Menard that there were Hurons in the interior that were starving, and therefore Menard decided he was going to go off to minister to them, although he himself only had a bag of sturgeon and some dried meat. So one of these fur traders that was thought to have gone to the west and then came back east was named L'Esperance. Now, we don't have proof of that, but we're assuming because L'Esperance, he knew the route, he knew the way that Menard needed to go. So it's only safe to assume that he knew the way and he had been there already. So they both had left together and went to try to find these Hurons. And from Menard's letter, on the 1st of May, we performed our devotions in the cabins of some Algonquins, and we left them and found this great lake all bordered with ice. So at the distance of 2 leagues from that place, we arrived among other Algonquins, where, fearing lest the same thing might happen to us among the former ones, we passed on. After 5 days, we finally reached the main body. On Ascension Day, I saw a Huron who had started 11 days before from the Tobacco Nation, and he told me people were dying of hunger in this country, which was the headwaters of the Black River. And that is in his letter, and that is in quote. So upon L'Esperance returning from this foray in this area, Menard must have talked him into going back. So this is the part of the story that has been hotly debated for over 100 years. What route did Menard use to penetrate into the interior Wisconsin? Exactly where did he meet his demise? And I'll be clear again, there are no source materials, only speculation. That being said, let me tell you some probable routes that he may have taken. Now, it'd be a good idea right now to pause the podcast to pull out a map of the western Upper Peninsula and northeastern Wisconsin. So go ahead and hit pause. And now we will continue. So there are historians like Louise Kellogg who opined that Menard overwintered in Chequamegon Bay and not L'Anse. So the location of where he overwintered, this was hotly debated for a while and was finally established as L'Anse. And I'll explain why at the end, how they figured that out. So if he didn't winter at Chequamegon, which is where Grosselli and Radisson overwintered, why would Menard paddle all the way there only to go south on the Bad River and double back, especially when there was a well-known hiking portage route between L'Anse and Lac Vieux? Well, we know that Menard had a French guide, and he possibly had others. Another French guide, a name that shows up, is Guérin. So these are the guys that went, and they came back, and now they're going back again. So there's a biographer on Menard, Alexander M. Stewart, and he states that the following as far as where he went. So Stewart thinks that he actually overwintered in Chequamegon. The route was down the Chippewa and up a tributary to the headwaters of the Black River. Well, it has been established that he did not overwinter at the Chequamegon, like I said. But this would still be an interesting route. So if he went to Chequamegon, and he could double back and go down the Montreal River. There was a well-established portage and river route along the Montreal River. And this would have brought him overland to, in his letter, he called it the Small Lake Country, which is probably the Cisco chain and Sylvania areas until they reached Lac Vieux. And then from Lac Vieux to the Chippewa. Another, he doesn't call himself a historian, he calls himself a topologist. His name is Jim Woodward, and he did an expansive study of canoe routes and portages in the state of Michigan. Well, Woodward claims Menard went through the Keweenaw Portage, and then to Chequamegon, and then found his way to the Black River via Lac Vieux Desert. So to me, that seems awfully convoluted. So again, did he really go to the Chequamegon? Unlikely. And a reference to a portage of the Quaking Bog was likely the Keweenaw Portage itself. So, and that also helps us tie together St. Therese, the portage of the Quaking Bog, and then St. Esprit. So St. Esprit is thought to be Chequamegon. Again, I'll explain later. So from Woodward, he recognizes that there were router routes that led to the Montreal, and others that led to the Ontonagon and Menominee River complex. So the key waters, according to Woodward, used to approach Ontonagon and Menominee headwaters were the Wisconsin River and its head lake, Lac Vieux Desert. Lac Vieux Desert is a large lake astride the border between Wisconsin and Michigan. He recognizes that it was a fur trade spot and a crossroads of the north. So he says if you wanted to go to Lake Superior the long way, you would go up the Wisconsin and then walk an 80-mile trail that led to Keweenaw Bay. So that's the Lac Vieux L'Anse Trail. Or if you wanted to paddle and portage all the way, you would go up the Wisconsin almost all the way to Lac Vieux Desert, divert to a waterland route which would take you to the Cisco branch of the Ontonagon River and then down to Lake Superior. So there's lots of options here. Again, no maps, just, people remembering, the route they took. So A little over 3 miles south of the state line, is the tributary of the Wisconsin named Portage Creek, which flows in from the northwest. And it emanates from a little Portage Lake, and into this lake flows a creek whose head lake is about 1/2 mile from Black Oak Lake, which in turn is about 1/2 mile from Spring Lake. So this latter lake is at the very upstream end of the Cisco branch of the Ontonagon. So Lac Vieux Desert is also within reach of the middle branch of the Ontonagon and the south branch of the Paint River. Truly a crossroads. A tributary to the Mississippi in western Wisconsin, running about parallel to the Wisconsin River and the Chippewa River and its tributary, the Flambeau. So at the northern end, the Flambeau has 2 tributaries, the Turtle and the Mantowish rivers. At its eastern end, the headwaters of the Mantowish are close to the headwaters of the 2 branches of the Presque Isle River. These Mantowish headwaters are also close to a tributary of the Cisco branch of the Ontonagon. So, and the Turtle River is less than 5 ways from that. So this is truly a headwater region, and you have a lot of options to pick from depending on which way you are going. So it is probably the work of Father Schmerler. And Father Schmerler, in the summer of 1959, he's far from being an armchair historian, but what he did is he paddled all the suspected rapids and falls where Menard is thought to have possibly had his demise. This historian priest was not fishing. He was looking, and he was trying to find these various routes that were plied 300 years before. He wrote a paper, The Search for Wisconsin's First Priest. And he writes, he hiked overland across the Upper Peninsula, entered the Wisconsin River near Lac Vieux Desert, and proceeded down it to the vicinity of Wausau. So this great lake that was referenced very well may have been Lac Vieux Desert that Menard referenced it. So Schmerler was trying to discover the exact location where Rene Menard died while trying to reach these refugee Indians on the headwaters of the Black River in the summer of 1661. So the Iroquois warriors, they were hundreds of miles to the east, and they had driven rival nations who were sympathetic to the French from New York, Ohio, Quebec, and Michigan. These fleeing tribes included, the Sauk, the Fox, Potawatomi, Kickapoo, Miami, Huron, and Ottawas. And they took refuge in the deep woods of Wisconsin during the 1650s. Some of those who lived close to these French settlements that were in the area, they became Christian, and Father Menard joined a flotilla of fur traders to rejoin his congregation to the far western wilderness. That is why he set off, is to look for this mission work. So Father Schmerler thinks that Menard hiked overland across the Upper Peninsula, entered the Wisconsin River near Lac Vieux Desert, and proceeded down it to the vicinity of Wausau. Now, again, they were guided by a couple Frenchmen who had already made the trip, and they threaded the streams northwest of Wausau. And when they were within 1 day of their destination, Father Menard left the canoe to make a short portage while L'Esperance shot the rapids, or at least researched the route. So the party became separated, and Father Menard was never seen again. 300 years later, Father Schmerler followed the Chippewa downriver from Lac Vieux Desert in a 14-foot kayak. He had first examined all the contemporary textual and cartographic evidence, and as well as reviewing all the previous theories about where Father Menard had died. Allowing for modern changes in the river, such as dams, and considering the practices of 17th century voyagers, he ultimately concluded that the rapids where Father Menard vanished were on the Rib River, where it crosses the Taylor-Lincoln County line just east of modern Goodrich. His paper is a great read, goes into intricate detail about each rapid explored to come up with the most logical place where Menard met his demise. So Menard was guided by one or the other or both when they were within 1 day of their ultimate destination. So L'Esperance, Guerin, and some other Frenchmen and Menard, they got separated about a day away from this settlement. So we know this because L'Esperance, after making efforts to find Menard, they trekked towards this Huron village but overshot it in about a day's time. So they were probably closer than a day. They're probably a half or 3/4 of a day away. So this search party from this village came back with the Frenchman, but they found no signs of him, and he was not found. However, his cassock and breviary were found years later among the Dakotas. So that's an interesting find. So not much is written speculating how he died. He was thought to be in poor physical health and in his mid-50s. Some theories that he was murdered by a member of his party, maybe by a rogue Native American. Maybe he became injured and incapacitated, and some even say he fell and washed down the river. Again, all speculation. So after this era of European missionaries and explorers, the Vieux Desert Lance Trail continued to serve as a significant route for trade and travel up until the mid-1940s. And as Europeans expanded into the area, the trail saw increased use by settlers and loggers in the area, exploiting the rich natural resources of the Upper Peninsula. And this would have been in the 19th and early 20th century. So the trail, its importance shifted from commercial use to recreational cultural significance. So typically what happens with a Native American trail is when the local settlers come in, they will use it themselves, and it kind of gets wider and even becomes some of our today's roads, if you will. And these trails were turned into small roads, and then when they were abandoned and the Ottawa National Forest was created, a lot of this trail was designated as Forest Service road. So a lot of this trail, it's not 100% contiguous, but there are some significant chunks of this trail that have been converted over to Forest Service road. So there is historical significance with this. My understanding is the tribe is working with the Ottawa National Forest to bring this trail back. So this is a preservation effort that is taking place by these various communities, historical societies, and even conservation groups. So hopefully someday we'll be able to have an official Vieux Desert Lance hiking trail, and maybe this can act as a testament of the enduring connection between history and nature, between modern man and ancient man. So, from its early use by indigenous tribes to the journeys of European missionaries and explorers like Father Rene Menard, the trail is a living record of the region's past. So, as we walk this trail today, don't only enjoy the natural beauty, but also honor the legacy of those who traveled these paths before us. So again, source material only exists as Menard's letters and the Jesuit relations, Pierre Radisson's memoirs, and the oral history of the Europeans and Ojibwa passed down about the event of his demise. As for the location of his winter encampment, here's how historians connected the dots to determine it was Lance and not Chequamegon. So on the margin of the sheet containing his paragraph, in his letter, from Saint Bay de Saint Therese, this 1st of March, 1661, is what he wrote. So arriving at the present Keweenaw Bay, he arrived on Saint Therese's day. And Menard named the bay for that saint. So his residence while there must have been in the vicinity of Lance. And at the end of this letter, he mentions the Algonquin name, and this is key here, of the place as Chassahamaigan, which is a name apparently used by no other writer. A similar name, however, occurs later in de Bougainville's report of 1757 of the capture of Fort William Henry. He gives a list of Indian allies present at that occasion, and among them are 14 sauteurs from Coascamagan, the same name. So they took the Native American name that they were told in 1757, matched it with what Menard wrote down in 1660. So one in the same place. It's Lance. That's how they finally came up with that. So Saint Esprit is what we call Chequamegon, and the early French explorers used Saint Esprit in a lot of different locations. So and it has since been known as truly Chequamegon. So That is pretty much how historians have decided that the difference between the two. A lot of great resources on this. This did not come off the top of my head. I have actually been working on this for the better part of 4 years, trying to get this in my head and figure this all out, because resources are scant. I'm reading a lot of other people's interpretations. Some of it is kind of goofy, but myself personally, I believe that Father Rene Menard probably, I'd say 55% chance went up the through the Keweenaw and then down like the Montreal to Lac Vieux. I really would love to have him hike the whole Lac Vieux Lance Trail, but he was traveling with French Coureur de Bois voyagers, if you will. These guys use canoes, right? So why in the world would they walk 45 miles? It's just how I look at it. But it's one or the other to me. Definitely went through Lac Vieux Desert. That is for sure. So if you are looking for resources, we have lots of it out there. H. Colin Campbell, he has an article in the American Historical Review in 1896. It's pretty good reading. H.C. Campbell also wrote a biography on Father Menard. Radisson's own words, he's got his journal, and that is a... be patient when you read that one. Jim Woodward created Canoe Portages and Routes, which apply to Michigan. Very good read as well. Louise Kellogg, the first missionary in Wisconsin. That is published in the Wisconsin Magazine of History. If you go to the Wisconsin Magazine of History site, gobs of information, great resource. Others include Father Schmerler's paper, The Mystery of Father Rene Menard. We also have A Priest Journeys to Wisconsin Village of Exiled Hurons, also in that journal. A Search for Wisconsin First Priests, also in the journal. There is another book by Alexander Stewart, Rene Menard, A Life Story which connects the Finger Lakes region of New York with France. This covers his early life. Another book is The Wisconsin Journey by Kurt Leschly. And finally, The Jesuit Relations and Allied Documents, Travels and Explorations of the Jesuit Missionaries, New France. And chapter 8 in the entry for 1661 covers Menard. So there you go. Lots of resources. Those are the best ones that I could find, and those are ones you should check out if you're interested. Well, there you go. The Disappearance of Father Rene Menard, Lac Vieux Desert Lance Trail. I'm your host, Tom Funk. Thank you for joining me, and we will see you again on the podcast. Make sure to subscribe. Make sure to check out all the content, and thanks for listening.